Showing you guys how to install a MotoFab 2-inch leveling kit on a 2014 to 2017. Now with all your lug nuts loosened on both sides, you'll want to jack up the vehicle. We're just going to pop off these strut caps. And you'll just push them out the way. Now with those out of the way, we're going to use an 18mm socket on some extensions and loosen the strut nuts.
We're not removing these, we're just loosening them about 3/4 of the way on. Now we have
loosened the 3 nuts. You don't have to do this, but it makes the process a lot easier is if you take 2 bungee cords and hook them from your lug nuts to the second spring on the strut. This is to hold the knuckle in place while you're removing nuts. Now while the knuckle is being supported, you want to use a 10mm and remove this little bolt that holds on your brake line and your ABS sensor. Now the bracket should just come away and you can put the bolt back in so you don't lose it. Now that you've made sure that your brake lines are free to move, you're going to use an 18mm socket. You're going to remove the ball joint on the upper control arm. That removed, you're going to want to take a big hammer and smack the side of the knuckle. Make sure not to hit anything else. You have to hit the knuckle in order to free the upper control arm. And just like that, it'll pop free. Now I leave it in there just a little bit for now while I remove the rest of the stuff. It makes it not wobble around too much. Now you'll want to undo the outer tie rod. And same with the outer tie rod, you want to hit it with a hammer until it comes free. Now with that free, now you're going to use 2/15s to remove the sway arm linkage. I tend to use a wrench on the strut. So now with that all removed, we're going to turn the knuckle to the side, and this is your strut, and this is your bottom control arm, and this is where we're going to put the spacer in between the bottom control arm and the strut, and that is where you get your lift. It's essentially just making your strut longer, pushing your whole suspension down, changing the geometry. Now you're going to use a 15 and remove these bottom strut bolts. Now that you've removed those bolts, you have these lock-in-place nuts, and they just pop off with a flathead or a crow tip. Now with those removed, you're going to lower the control arm until you have enough space to fit your spacer in between the lower control arm and the strut. Now that you've made enough space, you're going to come with your spacer from behind and just slide it in place. Just like that. And you're going to take the provided hardware from the kit. You're going to put spacers on the bottom of the heads. Now you're going to put the bolts in upside down so the head is at the bottom. just like that. And you're going to put your nuts on. They go upside down so that way it doesn't catch any debris underneath when you're driving. Like if you hit a rock or something, it'll hit the control arm and it won't break this bolt. These are going to get torqued down in between 30 to 35. Now that you've torqued down the strut, the hardest part is getting the upper control arm back connected to the knuckle, because the spring won't compress. When you lift the bottom of the knuckle, it'll just lift the whole truck. So what I do is I'll connect strap from the bottom control arm to the upper control arm and just strap it back up into place. Just like that. And be careful with your brake line there. So now with that back connected, I'll just put the nut back on and you're good. Now the important part of this is that this is a ball joint, so it's free to spin. So if you just put a wrench onto the ball joint and spin it, the whole ball joint will spin and it won't actually end up tightening anything. So you have to use a T40 bit and put it in underneath the ball joint just like this, and then use a wrench to tighten it. Now before you tighten anything down all the way, you want to put everything back together and then go back and torque everything down. That way nothing is too tight. So now you're just going to bring back outer tie rod, put the nut back on it. Now back over to your sway arm. Okay, off camera I went back and tightened everything down, torqued everything down. Now you just got to put your ABS sensor and brake line bracket back on. Remember, that's a 10mm. You don't have to tighten that down too much. Small bolt, easily stripped. Now you want to go back up to the top and retighten down your strut bolts. Go back through, make sure everything's torqued down, make sure everything's tight. Now that you've put your spacer in, wherever you lifted your truck and took your tire off will now be 2 inches lower, so there's a good chance you're going to have to lift your truck up even higher with your jack before you can put your tire back on.